Tonight we're going to talk about the... Are we ready, guys? Tonight we're going to be talking about the early Amoraic era. The Amoraic era refers to the era of scholars and rabbis that constitute the authors of the Talmud. And our story begins after the passing of Rabbi Judah the Prince. Rabbi Judah the Prince is the last generation of Tanaim, of rabbis who authored the Mishnah. Rabbi Judah the Prince, he spearheaded and oversaw the compilation and sealing of the Mishnah. From that point forward, the Mishnah is going to be accepted by all of the Jewish communities as the final word of the first step of writing of the oral Torah. Moreover, from that point forward, all of the scholarship that's going to be done by the great communities and the great Torah centers is going to be oriented around the Mishnah Torah and building and expanding and augmenting the oral Torah evident in the Mishnah. The rabbis of the Mishnahite era are all the rabbis we've discussed previously, so like Hillel, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, and of course Rabbi Judah the Prince. These are the people that we have discussed over here, who are authors of the Mishnah Tanaim, and they are chiefly involved in the development of the oral Torah and writing down the Mishnah, which is the laws. The Talmud, the next stage, is going to be written by generations of Amoraim, of rabbis from the Talmudic era, and their job is to build upon the Mishnah, whereas the Mishnah is the laws, the Talmud is going to be everything else surrounding those laws. So like sources for the laws, examples where the laws apply, examples where the laws don't apply, exceptions, reasons for it, further analysis, explication, etc. Now the truth is we are going to be doing, as always, we touched just a sampling of the Tanaim. We spoke about 7 or 8 of the great rabbis of the time. Indeed, there were thousands of them who were all remarkable, each in his own right, each one of them worthy of deep analysis and focus and study. We just, of course, picked some highlights. And the same is going to be true with regards to the next era of sages called Amoraim. This remarkable era is going to stretch for around 300 years from the sealing of the Mishnah to the sealing of the Babylonian Talmud. And tonight I want to analyze that first generation, the first era, the shift from the Mishnah to the Talmud, the shift from the Tanaim, the rabbis of the Mishnah, to the Amoraim, the rabbis of the Talmud. And we're going to look at the era in general, but more specifically we're going to look at the important names, the great Jewish personalities that really embody, personify this shift, this change, and this turnover of the new era. So, after the death of Rabbi Judah the Prince, there's going to be a slight decline in the Jewish community in Judah. During Rabbi Judah the Prince's time, we've spoken about it, he was good friends with Antoninus, Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, that provided a little interlude, a little respite from Roman persecution that's going to provide the tranquility and the serenity and the peace of mind for this monumental effort of writing the Mishnah to be done. After that time, the hospitable Roman community ceases, and there's going to be a lot more difficult times for the Jews in Israel. Remember, they don't live in Jerusalem anymore. All of them are living in the north. The Mishnah is written in the north, in the Galilee, in Tiberias. But when they still had Rabbi Judah the Prince, the Nasi, the Prince of Israel, along with the Sanhedrin, along with this monumental effort of writing down the Mishnah, that is always going to be the center of focus. All the rabbis, all the promising scholars from the whole world would converge upon northern Israel to join this effort. Once he passes, the scholars are going to spread elsewhere. No longer will they always be coalesced in the same location. They're going to move different places in Israel, and there's going to be a pivot, so to speak, to Babylon, whereas even though the Jewish community in Israel is still going to be vibrant and still going to flourish and still going to be a viable Torah center for the next several hundred years, the main center of Torah and the central leadership of Jewish life is going to be passed from Israel to Babylon, to Bavel. Now, it's important to note that Babylon is not a new Jewish community. Years before the destruction of the first temple, Nebuchadnezzar, they come in and they sweep away 10,000 of the best and brightest of the Jewish community in Judea, in Judah, in Israel, and they bring him to exile in Babylon, where they establish a Jewish community, and thus when the masses of the Jews come after the destruction of the temple, they already find infrastructure that can be hospitable to Jewish life there. And over time, that community grew and flourished. And even when Ezra came 70 years later back to Israel to rebuild the temple, reestablish the community in Israel, he only had a few or relatively small amount of Jews from Babylon to join the pilgrimage to rebuild Israel. The vast majority of them opted to stay in Babylon, and thus the Babylon community that we're going to meet here at the beginning of the 3rd century of the Common Era, sometime between the year 210 to 250, that's a community that's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, but so long as the temple was around, and so long as the Sanhedrin was in full force, and the Masifta and the great rabbis, before the Mishnah has been written, Israel is always going to be the center. Of course, Hillel was called Hillel the Babylonian because he lived in Babylon, came to Israel. And there are many other examples of rabbis that were vibrant during the Mishnaic era, during the times of the Tanaim, that came from Babylon, from Bavel, to Israel. But the center was always in Israel. And now there's going to be a gradual shift from Israel, from Judah, to Babylon. Now it's important to note that the community in Babylon had several major advantages over the community in Judah. Number one, both of them were under Roman rule. Rome, of course, the Roman Empire controlled everything, but the Rome didn't really exert its muscles in Babylon. They were nominally in control of the land, but Roman rule and the harsh Roman decrees didn't really have the same force in Babylon as it did in Israel. They had a relative degree of autonomy. They also had very strong Jewish leadership because they had the official political representation in the offices of the Exarch, the Reish Galusa. So that's one advantage that they had. They weren't always living under the constant threat of annihilation because Babylon, they did not have hundreds of years of various different groups operating from within trying to undermine the Jewish community. If you look at the history of the Jews in Israel at the time, they had a couple of years of Hellenists, then a couple of years of Sadducees, a couple hundred years of Sadducees, and then they had the Christians, and they kind of going from one foe to another foe, not just the Romans from without, you have the Jews and the renegade Jews from within, causing a lot of instability, a lot of disunity and fighting. Did not have that. It was almost non-existent, and therefore they were primed to really take a major step forward. Now, throughout the time, there's going to be crossover. There's going to be Babylonians coming to Israel. There's going to be Jews from Judah, from Israel, going to Babylon. But it's interesting to note that they had like this competition existing between the two. So, for example, the Talmud tells that when the Babylonians would come to Israel, they would have their own synagogues. They had their own customs. These are hundreds of years old, the communities. It's almost like today, we have the Sephardim and Ashkenazim. How old is that bifurcation? That's only 1,000 years old. This is 700 years already. It's significant time for various different customs to develop. So the Babylonians come to Israel, they establish their own little Babylonian synagogue with their own Babylonian customs. But more tragic would be the fact that the Babylonians would really like to intermarry amongst themselves. And the reason for that, the deep underlying reason for that, is the Babylonians were very wary of the Jews living in Judea and Israel. Because they know there's hundreds of years of Hellenists and Sadducees, and who knows who you're going to let your kid marry, who knows what their stock is, what their pedigree is. And therefore, the Talmud says that some of the Babylonians who came to study Torah by the great Rabbi Yochanan was the leader, the paramount leader of the Jewish community in Israel, and all the students from all over the world flocked to the Galilee, to Rabbi Yochanan, and they want to study Torah from him, but they didn't want to marry his own daughters. Because to them, in their worldview, the Babylonians wanted to only marry Babylonians. They were the highest stock. But that shows a little bit of the character of these, this dual coexisting communities that's really going to be the story going forward. For the duration of the Amoraic era, the era of the writing of the Talmud, there's going to be two concurrent Torah centers. And there's many examples, like we said, of rabbis going back and forth. And of course, the first thing that happens once a rabbi travels from Israel to Babylon or Babylon to Israel is they sit him down and they debrief him. They say, okay, well, what Torah is going on in Israel? And what Torah is over there? What are they teaching? The Talmud is replete with episodes of when this rabbi came, he said as follows. What happened was, as a rabbi shows up, all the students get up and come visit him. And they say, okay, tell us what the Torah of Israel is. And then a Babylonian rabbi goes to Israel, and they quickly sit him down and say, okay, tell us what the Torah they're teaching in Babylon. So there was a interflow of Torah and Jewish culture, which is one of the same, of course, between these two communities. But the balance of power and balance of influence over the Jewish world is going to gradually shift from Israel to Babylon over the course of these eras. Tonight I want to focus on some of the pivotal characters that really got this era started. The great leaders of Israel, Judea, those names are interchangeable, the great leaders of Babylon, the various institutions that they developed, and the way they set the Jewish people on a path of greatness in Torah that ultimately will result in, of course, the most monumental, or maybe the second most monumental human achievement, and that is not the building of the Tower of Giza or the Tower of Pisa or the Golden Gate Bridge or the Dubai, but writing down the Talmud. Okay, so the first personality I want to talk about is someone by the name of Rav Abba Bar Evo. If you say this name to someone who's a Talmud scholar, they probably will look at you quizzically, wondering who this actually is. Now, this was his name, but he's almost never called this by this name. He's actually called Rav. And it's interesting to note, just like Rabbi Judah the Prince was renamed by his peers Rabbi, they just called him Rabbi, Rabbi Abba Bar Evo was just named Rav, Rabbi, because his influence was so complete over the Jews of his time that they renamed him, and they said, we don't need to say which rabbi is it, we'll just call him Rabbi or Rav, because he really has the effect of being the rabbi and the leader and the teacher of all of us. And this is Rav. Sometimes he's called Abba Arika. His first name was Abba. Arika means long, because he was very tall and very beautiful in stature. Now, he was born in Babylon. He lived a very, very long life. He traveled to Israel to study under Rabbi Judah the Prince. So he's right at this transition point. He's actually studying from and with the great scholars of his time that were Tanoim, that were parts of, authors of the Mishnah. The Talmud, in fact, says that Rav is the only personality, one of the select few personalities that qualifies as both a Tana and an Amora, both an author of Mishnah and an author of Talmud, which really matters because there's a universal principle of Talmud is that they cannot argue with each other. If you're a rabbi from the Amoraic era, you could add and you could explain and explicate what the Mishnah says, but you cannot disagree with it. And therefore, a common question the Talmud has is how does this rabbi argue with the Mishnah? He can't argue with the Mishnah. Well, when Rav argues with the Mishnah, he can, because the Gemara says famously, Rav Tana Upalag. Rav is also like a Tana, and therefore he is entitled to argue with another Tana. Now, he studied under Rabbi Judah the Prince. He studied also under Rabbi Chia. And then when he went back to Babylon the first time, Rabbi Chia, who happened to have been his uncle, he brought him before Rabbi Judah the Prince and says, okay, he's going back to Babylon. He spent years now studying under your tutelage. He's going back to Babylon. Well, what happens? A rabbi's going back to Babylon. He needs his rabbinic ordination. So he said to him, okay, can he teach? He says, yeah, he can teach. Can he judge? Yeah, he can judge. This is Rabbi Judah the Prince, the venerated sage and leader of the people, ordaining the Rav, who's going to be the leader of the Jews in Babylon. And he said, is he going to be allowed to permit the blemishes of a firstborn? Halacha is that a firstborn animal gets consecrated with the laws of tithing. But if that firstborn animal has a blemish, blemish that a rabbi has to evaluate, then that animal loses its holiness. Can he do that? Rabbi Judah the Prince says no. This he can't do. And his whole life, this dog, Rav, that he didn't get the complete ordination for Rabbi Judah the Prince. He got like this half. He got most of it. Most of what he wanted to be allowed to do, he got, not this. Now, why not? Rav happened to have been the world's expert at determining which blemish was a permissible blemish to invalidate a firstborn animal. Talmud says that he spent 18 months in a farm studying animals to become the expert. And says the Gemara, that's precisely the reason why he was ineligible to adjudicate that. He was such an expert that his understanding dwarfed everyone else's understandings, and therefore, what's going to happen? He's going to permit something, people are not going to get it, and they will erroneously assume that he's permitted it for this reason, because they can't fathom the depth of his reasoning, and therefore they'll come to permit it for something that was not his reasoning. Therefore he says, you know what, don't get involved with this. Ironically, sometimes in the area that we're most ill-suited to adjudicate. Now Rav is going to spend some time of his life bouncing back and forth. He's going back to Israel. After Rabbi Judah the Prince dies, his son, Rabbi Gamliel, becomes the Nasi. So Rav, who's already an accomplished scholar, one of the leaders of Babylonian Jewry, he comes back to the son of Rabbi Judah the Prince. Says, would you maybe give me ordination to permit the firstborn? He says, no, my dad didn't do it. I'm not doing it. Sorry. Now, back to Babylon, the leader of the Babylonian Jewry was one of the Amoraic. His name was Rav Shela. Rav worked as an associate rabbi, associate Rosh Hashiva, and when he died, so there was one massive institution in Babylon. It was called Neher Dai, and this appears everywhere in Talmud. These institutions lasted for hundreds upon hundreds of years. When Rav Shela, the leader of that institution, died, there were two candidates who could have replaced him. One of them is Rav, and the other of them is Shmuel. It's called just Shmuel. Now, neither one of them wanted to take the job because that would leave their fellow out in the dark. So what they agreed was that Shmuel, he will head the institution of Neher Dai, where the Rosh Hashiva Rav Shela just passed, and Rav will go on to open up his own institution. So Rav goes to a city called Sura, sometimes also called Masa Mechasya, and this was a city that did not have Torah. It didn't have Torah on many levels, and the people were very ignorant. And the Talmud describes how Rav came. He built an institution with his own hands and eventually grew to being the dominant institution of the world. He expanded the institution. He had 1,200 permanent students, including thousands upon thousands of students that showed up for several months a year during these conventions of Torah that would have for 2 months a year. All the Babylonian Jews would look, and this was the Harvard. The Harvard of Babylon was Sura, the center that Rav established in the beginning of the 3rd century, and this would last for nearly 1,000 years. It would last until the 10th or 11th century. Now, Rav in one neighborhood, Shmuel in the other neighborhood, he became a shiva of the other place, and they are some of the most prolific contributors to Talmud. Now, Shmuel himself was also a remarkable character. There's many examples we could talk about his piety. A few of them, there's a great episode where he was very fastidious to not ever accept bribes from someone that you're going to judge. Like the Torah says, you can't accept the bribes. So there's a story once, he was crossing a river, and it was a little bit of it was a hard thing to traverse, so someone extended a hand to help him across. A few months later, the guy shows up in his court. He says, no, I'm sorry, I can't judge you because I might show slight favoritism to you as well. In the city of Neher Dai, they had a certain custom that if you had a pot that you used for the rest of the year that may have chametz in it, you would not be allowed to use that same pot for Passover. Even if you tried to do hagali, you tried to purify it, you cannot use it. That was their custom. So the pot makers of the town of Neher Dai, they say, okay, it's a month before Passover, what do? Let's jack up the prices. Says Shmuel, you want to jack up the prices? If you do that, I'm going to announce that from now on the customs change and people can purify their pots, And if you're doing that, my job as a rabbi and as a leader is to not always be machmir, to be stringent when the people are going to suffer as a result. There's another example of that, very similar story. During the holiday of Sukkot, so you have to use the 4 species. So the plant growers of the town, they would say, okay, let's jack up the prices of myrtle branches. Shmuel tells them, you do that, I'm going to make an official edict of the town. Everyone can use whatever branches they want. If it's new, if it's nice, if it's dry, it doesn't matter. And that way he kept prices low and affordable for them. So these 2 great scholars, Rav and Shmuel, they appear on almost every page of Talmud. They have hundreds upon hundreds of debates in various areas of Talmud, and they really contribute massively towards the growing corpus of Talmud, of analysis of the Mishnah, that's going to be compiled in the great Babylonian Talmud hundreds of years later, and of course the Jerusalem Talmud. That's in Babylon. In Israel, we meet another transcendental character by the name of Rabbi Yochanan, or Rav Yochanan Bar. A similar name of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. If you remember, Yochanan ben Zakkai, he was the one who snuck out of the camp and went to meet Vespasian during the destruction of the temple. That's Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was a Tan and author of a Mishnah. This is Rabbi Yochanan, who's going to head is going to be established. Now, his father died before he was born. His mother died during childbirth, so he grew up orphaned. There's a great episode about Rav Yochanan when he was in utero. Talmud says that if a pregnant woman, she has a craving on Yom Kippur, so on Yom Kippur you got to fast. But if a pregnant woman's Talmud says you bring the woman in, in utero, who is the impetus, who's the stimulus for this craving, he'll hear it and he'll say, oh, it's Yom Kippur, how do I want my mom to have food? I'm going to quell the craving. That's what the Talmud says. That's the story. So Rabbi Judah the Prince, he was the leader of the community, and there's a woman, and she has a craving on Yom Kippur. So they bring her into Rabbi Judah the Prince. What do we do with this woman? She says, okay, whisper into your ear, today's Yom Kippur. They whisper into your ear, today's Yom Kippur, and remarkably, the child quells the craving. Rabbi Judah the Prince gets all inspired, and he announces to everyone, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. He quotes a verse in Scripture. Essentially, he's indicating that this child is destined for greatness, and that child ended up being the great Rabbi Yochanan. Now, like we said, he was born, and he was an orphan already. But fortunately, his parents left him a decent inheritance, but what he did, in line with the great heroes who give up everything for Torah, he had to start selling off his assets in order to pay for his family and for his Torah study. He could have gone into business, but if he went to business, Torah matehela, what's going to be with the Torah? So the Talmud tells a great story that Rabbi Yochanan was walking with one of his students, and as they're passing by various land and parcels, and so they pass by a field, and Rabbi Yochanan says, see this field? It used to be mine, but I needed the money to study Torah, so I sold it. They keep on walking a little further. You see this vineyard? It used to be mine, but I sold it because I wanted to study Torah. They walk even further, and they see an olive grove, and yet again Rabbi Yochanan says, you see this olive grove? It was mine. I sold it because I wanted to study Torah. Eventually, he ran out of funds, and he was between a rock and a hard place. What to do? He was living in great poverty, but the poverty became unbearable. He had to find a job to pay for his family. And now, at that time, the rabbis were very, very hesitant. Even the greatest rabbis of their times absolutely refused to be paid for their Torah study. So that's why most of them worked on the side. So Rabbi Yochanan says, okay, he was talking to his friend, and they decided that they're going to leave Torah study and find a job. So they said, let's and they quoted a verse. The verse tells us in Deuteronomy that there's a mitzvah to not be poor. That's maybe one of the reasons why Jews are so successful or so obsessed with mitzvahs. You got to do it properly, right? There's a mitzvah to not be poor. And they said, okay, we have to fulfill this mitzvah. Let's go find a job. So they're talking about it, and they're sitting and discussing it, and they sit next to a shaky wall. And two angels appear, which, by the way, as an aside, we see like the remarkable character and the capacity for visions that these people have. So two angels appear, and Rabbi Yochanan hears them talking, and they said, see this wall? Let's push the wall down. Let's crush these people, because these people are abandoning Torah, and they're going to go waste their time becoming an accountant or a lawyer. What's going to be with the Torah? Let's destroy them right here, right now. That's what the angels are talking to each other. And that's one angel suggests that. The other angel says, I don't know, Rabbi Yochanan's become a great scholar. We shouldn't smash him. That's what Rabbi Yochanan hears. So Rabbi Yochanan turns to his friend and says to him, did you hear that? So, hear what? I didn't hear anything. So Rabbi says, oh, if he didn't hear it, it was a message intended for me. And with my family, I'll live in great poverty, but at least I'll do what is incumbent upon me. So he returned to his studies, whereas his friend went into business. Now, Rabbi Yochanan, of course, he rose the ranks, became the great leader of his time, and was appointed the head of the yeshiva. One day, he gets a visit from his old friend, the businessman. And Rabbi Yochanan tells him, you see me, I have thousands of students, look what kind of, what organization, what institution I have over here. If you would have stayed studying with me, if you would have kind of roughed it out, you too would have had this great opportunity of Torah greatness. So Ilfa, who was his that's the name of the person. He walks up and he climbs. He does it very dramatic, of course. He climbs onto a ship and he hangs a noose around his neck, and he announces to the crowd, "I want anyone to quote me any Torah teaching and see if I know it. If I don't know it, I'll hang myself." So they start peppering him with questions from the crowd, and every one of them he swats away. And he's successful. And that's how he survived. He was tested, and he knew all the answers. This, I think, shows a good lesson. You don't have to only study Torah to be a Torah expert. You could also be someone who's evolved in the world, and if your priorities are for Torah, and even when you work, you view that as something tertiary, something you just need as a means to fulfill your true ambition, which is Torah study, you too could achieve Torah greatness. But Rabbi Yochanan climbed to the absolute acme and apex and pinnacle and zenith of the Torah world. Now, he was someone whose holiness and purity was so complete that, in a way similar to Moshe, his face radiated. He was beautiful. Talmud made a description of his beauty that's really striking. The Talmud says, what do you want to do? If you want to have a picture, imagery, how beautiful is Rabbi Yochanan? This is what the Talmud suggests to do. He says, take a silver goblet that's right out of the crucible, so fresh, the gleaming silver, and you fill it with red seeds of pomegranates, and then you surround it with a bed of roses, and you put it between the sun and the shade, and you look at it, and that countenance that you'll see, that color, that striking imagery, that was the visage of Rav Yochanan. And the Talmud would say, it's a great story or anecdote. The great anecdote of the Talmud was that when the women would go to the mikvah, so the laws of Nida mandate that a woman, when she's ovulating, essentially, she goes to the mikvah, and that's when she is most primed to conceive. So Rabbi Yochanan would sit at the entrance of the mikvah, and he would sit there, and the idea being that all the women who walked out, the first thing they would see is the beautiful Rabbi Yochanan, the great Torah scholar, and that way, when they have children, it's likely that image will impact the beauty of the child. That's what the Gemara says. And the people say to him, his students say to him, but wait a minute, aren't you looking at aren't all these women there before? He says, well, the evil eye is powerless. It doesn't matter the fact that all the women are looking at me. It's not going to affect me negatively because the evil eye is powerless above him. Now his beauty is interesting because it's going to be the cause for him meeting his study partner, his Torah partner. And that's the fourth character that we're going to discuss tonight, and that's Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish, also known, that was his nickname, but he's also called Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, and he has a very strange backstory. He was a thief, he was a robber, but he was also a gladiator and also a vigilante. But he was someone of tremendous, immense physical strength. So the Talmud tells that he would participate in gladiator fights, but also he was part of a group of bandits that would kill cannibals, essentially. There were cannibals roaming the land, and they would try to kidnap people and eat them. So Reish Lakish was part of a group of people that they would kill those people. And one time he submitted himself to a band of cannibals. Talmud tells the story, remarkable. And the cannibals, they had a rule. The rule was that they always gave someone a last wish. And there's two reasons given why they gave someone a last wish. Either because they wanted to have atonement for killing him, some righteous cannibals there, or because they knew that if someone died and they were all nervous, they were all tingly, then their blood wouldn't sweeten their meat. So they didn't want. This is what the Talmud says. It's maybe a little too much, but listen to what happened. It's a remarkable story. So they wanted kind of to have like a juicy steak, and therefore they would always grant the last request. So Reish Lakish is captured by these people, and he takes with him a little bag. In the bag he put a rock, but he hid the rock in a way they can't find it. So he says, okay, you guys are going to eat me, fine, but grant me my last wish. And my only wish is that I take this little sock and I swap you guys in the head. They're like, okay, that's your wish, that's your wish. He ties them up. He takes this rock, he smashes them on their head, and he knocks them all unconscious. And when they wake up, the guy's like, what's going on? So like, you're smiling at me? He hits them again and kills them all. That's what he used to do for fun, Reish Lakish. Now, that's what he used to do. Now, there's this dramatic encounter that he has. Now, he has nothing to do with Torah. He knows nothing about Torah at all, even though as a child, he too had the privilege of seeing Rabbi Judah the Prince. He saw him, but he didn't study Torah from him. So there's a great encounter between Rabbi Yochanan, the greatest rabbi of his time, and Reish Lakish, maybe the greatest thief and and just rogue vigilante of his time. Rabbi Yochanan was bathing in the Jordan River, and Reish Lakish sees him from afar and assumes that this is the most beautiful woman he's ever seen. So he right away leaps across the Jordan to go see who this is, and obviously demonstrating his tremendous physical prowess. So Rabbi Yochanan sees this man who just jumped across, leapt clear the Jordan River, and he says to him, wow, look at your strength. And he tells him the famous words, Chelach lo yiraisa, let your strength be used for Torah. What are you doing? You're wasting your time studying Torah. So Reish Lakish responds, Yaf yach lanashim, your beauty should be for women. He's like, you're telling me my skills are being underutilized because they should be used for Torah. Your skills are being underutilized, so you're so beautiful, and that should be for a woman. So Rabbi Yochanan says to him, okay, well, I have a deal. Let's split the difference here. If you commit to study Torah, I'll convince my sister, who's even more beautiful than me, to marry you. They sign off on the deal, and Reish Lakish tries to jump back on the other side of the Jordan, and he wasn't able to. He committed himself to Torah already, even though he hadn't even started. That already sapped some of his physical prowess and gave it over to his spiritual prowess. And indeed, he started studying Torah. First he started with reading scripture, then he started studying Mishnah, then he started studying Talmud, and he eventually became a peer, an equal, and a colleague to his brother-in-law Rabbi Yochanan, and they were at the helm of their institution. So Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, they were peers, but the truth is Rabbi Yochanan was still the Rosh Hashiva, and Reish Lakish was his assistant. So every day Rabbi Yochanan would give a lecture in front of the masses. But before the lecture, Reish Lakish would study the Torah to know it so well, to be prepared for the lecture. He would review it 40 times. And then, after the lecture was over, he would repeat it to the masses. He was in charge. He was the greatest expert in Rabbi Yochanan's Torah, that he would be the one who was nominated to repeat it over to the students, the one to hear it a second time, from Reish Lakish. And indeed, the Talmud tells that when they would debate, it was something to behold, because every teacher Rabbi Yochanan would say, Reish Lakish would find 24 questions to dispute it. He had such a tremendous grasp of Torah, he was able to respond in such a sophisticated way. Now, there's a few episodes here that are interesting to note with Reish Lakish himself. He had a few quarrels with the official leader of the time, the Nasi, who wasn't the greatest Torah scholar, but was still officially recognized for his political leadership of the people. So, for example, he criticized the practice of the Nasi, of the prince of Israel, to tax the Torah scholars. He says they should have an exemption. And he also accepted gifts from people. He was someone who liked to accept gifts, and Rabbi and Reish Lakish criticized him. But what really sank his fate was that Reish Lakish ruled that even someone who is the political leader of the people, even the Nasi, if they misbehave, if they transgress the Torah law, they, like every other citizen, can be flogged in the Jewish court of law for their misdeeds. The Nasi, the prince, he hears what Reish Lakish ruled, and right away he put out a decree against Reish Lakish, and Reish Lakish had to flee. Now this Nasi, this prince, showed up to the institution, to the yeshiva, like with everyone else, and he sees Rabbi Yochanan looking all solemn, and he says to him, why are you teaching Torah? So Rabbi Yochanan makes a movement with his hand, as if he's trying to clap with one hand. He says to me, for me to study Torah, for me to clap, I need to have Reish Lakish with me as well. I can't study without him. As I try to clap with one hand to study with him. He says, oh, you need him so badly, I'll let him come back. So he comes back, and when he arrives back, Reish Lakish compliments the Nasi by telling him, you're like the Almighty. When the Almighty took the Jews out of Egypt, he didn't use a messenger, he did it himself. When you're welcoming me back to society, you also did it yourself. So the Nasi asked him, so tell me, why did I'm not scared of you, I'm not scared of your powers, your political powers, all of that, your connections. God's Torah is immutable. It's incontrovertible, and it's not subject to your whims, even though you're a great leader of his time. So these are the two communities. We have Rav and Shmuel in Babylon, establishing amazing institutions of Torah. We have Rabbi Yochanan in Israel, together assisted by his brother-in-law Reish Lakish, and Torah really flourishes in a great way. Following question: what happens if someone wants to study Torah, but he also has to get married? The question is, which one do you do? Do you study Torah and then get married, or do you get married and then study Torah? That's the question. And Shmuel, who lived in Babylon, he said, you first get married, and then you go study Torah full time. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan from Israel, he said, what do you mean? If you have a yoke on your neck, could you possibly study Torah? And the point being is that a wife, that'll be a yoke on your neck. It'll interfere with your potential to study Torah completely. Therefore, he's saying study Torah first, and then you get married. And the Gemara says that Shmuel, who was in Babylon, who ruled first get married, that's for the Babylonians. Rabbi Yochanan, who was in Israel, who ruled first study Torah, that's for the people that lived in Israel. Why? So the Talmud says that at that time there was a trend that the Babylonians would go to Israel to study. So therefore, even though their marriage would be in conflict with Torah study, but still, because they get married, and then they go to Israel, so they're married, okay, but the wife's a few hundred miles away. So therefore, it won't interfere. Whereas the Jews who live in Israel, so they kind of are not away from home, therefore they should first study Torah and then get married. But this shows, I think, it's interesting, your thoughts on this aside. It does shed light on this time. Everyone's trying to figure out how do we maximize Torah study. That's the only question. And it depends. For someone where the conditions are going to be ripe for them to study Torah married, they should study Torah married. For someone whose conditions are going to be ripe to study Torah unmarried, that's what they prefer. But the bottom line is that this was an era, this was a time period. It's best, your situation is best suited for that goal. That's how you make your decisions. Pretty remarkable. Now, like we said, there was an interflow of students, but it's also interesting to learn about the remarkable relationship that the leaders of Babylon and Israel, namely Rav and Shmuel in Babylon and Rabbi Yochanan Shlakish in Israel, they had with each other. For example, the Talmud tells that there was one student who was a Babylonian who traveled to Israel. And he comes to Israel and he says, okay, now it's your time. You have to meet the Rosh Hashiva to see if you're admitted to the institution. He sits down with Rabbi Yochanan. I'm sure he was quivering. I would be. If you look, we will see some more stories about Rabbi Yochanan, which would reinforce that. And he says to him, okay, well, who's the head of the institution of Babylon? He says, well, Abba Arika, which was Rav's nickname, right? Abba, the tall one. He says, Abba Arika? Is that what you're calling him? I was there. I sat in under the great Rabbi Judah the Prince. I was 17 rows behind Rav. And when they would study together, Rabbi Judah the Prince and Rav, there was sparks of fire emanating from their mouths. There was such a high level of Torah study. And now you're calling him Abba Arika? And they had, we don't know what happened with that young student, but this shows the respect that they have for each other and the fact that they knew each other. In fact, the Talmud tells that when Rav died, so the correspondence between the two was always Rabbi Yochanan in Israel would contact Rav in Babylon. But then Rav died, so he would contact Shmuel. The Talmud tells that Shmuel was disappointed with the honorifics that he was given by Rav Yochanan. Because when Rav Yochanan addressed his letters to Rav, he would say, to our rabbi in Babylon. Whereas when he wrote to Shmuel, he would write to our colleague in Babylon. So Shmuel responded, you're not calling me rabbi? I'm a rabbi. And he would send him a letter. He sent him with the next student, with the next caravan. He sent him a complete 60-year calendar. Shmuel was so adept at calculation of months. For 60 years of calculations of the lunar and solar interconnectivity of those two and the complex mathematics behind that, he's like, look at me, look what I could deliver. Rabbi Yochanan sends back, sorry, I'm not impressed. Then he says, okay, you're not impressed? Next caravan, he sends 13 camels laden with questions. Basically, he piled up questions, sky high, put them all on camels, and sent it there. And then finally he says, okay, I'll call you rabbi. And for the ensuing conversations, he would indeed call him rabbi. There's another remarkable story. This is interesting. So if you thought some crazy stories, wait till you hear this. The story goes in Babylon. There was a student of Rav whose name was Rav Kahana. And the halacha is that an informer, someone who's an informer on the government, is someone that you're actually allowed to execute extrajudicially. The halacha is that certainly at that time, if someone if someone went to the government and says, oh, see this guy? He's evading taxes. So that would be a death sentence on the person. Because they would go and hit him and beat him until he revealed where his money was, whether he had it or not. So the halacha was, if someone is threatening to go tell the government, even about someone else's financial misdeeds or financial abilities, that essentially meant that this person, this perpetrator, is trying to kill the victim, and because they're trying to kill someone else who's innocent, they themselves can be killed. So Talmud tells a story that this one person came to Rav and said to him, I am going to tell about some other person's hay. He has stockpiles of hay, he has valuable assets, I'm going to go tell the government. So Rav says, don't do it, you're not allowed to do it. He says, I'm doing it. Rav Kahana's there, he sees what's happening, he punches the guy in his face, he dislocates his neck and kills him. Right there, right now. So Rav says, you did the right thing. But the local authorities are going to try to find who killed him. They're going to come after you. You did everything that's correct. But because it's dangerous for you to stay here, go to Israel. And go to Rabbi Yochanan. Okay. But when you go to Rabbi Yochanan to study Torah by him, you can't ask any questions for 7 years. And the reason why he did that is because he punished him, because even though he made the right decision in knocking out the informer, he still should have asked his teacher before he did it. He acted in front of his teacher in an imperfect manner because he didn't wait to ask his teacher what to do. And the halacha is, you have a teacher, you have a rabbi there, you don't take the initiative without them giving you the go-ahead. 7 years, be quiet, that's it. Kahana gets in the caravan, travels all the way to Israel. He arrives to Tiberias, to the Galilee, and he gets there right after the lecture is done. And all the students are milling around, and everyone's gathering around Reish Lakish, who's going to tell over the lesson, tell over the lecture. And he's there, and he says to himself, listen, I'm allowed to respond to Reish Lakish and to the other people here, just not to Rav Yochanan. So he starts talking to all the people and hearing what's going on, and he starts throwing questions, and they're like, whoa, where did this guy come from? So they go tell a message to Reish Lakish. There's a new star in town. His name is Rav Kahana, and he came from Babylon, and he's just the hero. The famous words of the Talmud says, Ari Alami Bavel, a lion ascended from Babylon. There's a new genius Torah scholar amongst us. Next day, they're like, okay, let's hear what this... Finally, he's there for the lecture of Rabbi Yochanan himself. They put him in the front seat. And Rabbi Yochanan starts giving a lecture. And he knows his rules, he can't say anything. So he's quiet. So he says one lecture, he says another lecture, and the guy all the way to the back. And he demotes him to the very last row after 7 other rows. So Rav Kahana says, okay, I did my penitence, right? Rav told me to be quiet for 7 years, but the fact that I was demoted 7 rows, that should cover it. So now I'm going to say whatever I want. So Rabbi Yochanan says, and he starts throwing questions, peppering questions from the end of the room. And every time he says, Rabbi Yochanan says something, he disproves him. And Rabbi Yochanan was a very old sage. He's sitting on 7 rows of carpets, and every time he's disproven by his student, his new student, Rav Kahana, he throws one of them away, and eventually sitting on the floor. And Rabbi Yochanan's there sitting on the floor, and he's been defeated now by this great Babylonian Torah genius, and he's like, I want to see what this person looks like. Now, why can he look at it? The Talmud describes Rabbi Yochanan was really old, and he had big furry eyebrows that were covering his eyes. He had a hard time seeing. To look at Rav Kahana, and Rav Kahana had a cleft lip. So it looked like he was smirking. So Rabbi Yochanan sees this guy who defeated him in Torah, and it looks like he's smirking at him. So he's like, and they bury him. And the next day, Rabbi Yochanan tells the rest of his students, did you see this Babylonian who's making a joke out of me? Look at his face, he was smirking at me. And they say to him, no, that's the way he always looks. He says, oh my God, what did I just do? What did I do? I just killed an innocent man. So he goes to the grave. And he gets to the grave, and he sees that there's a serpent surrounding the grave. And the serpent is surrounding the grave in a way that its tail is in its mouth. So it's making a complete circle, not letting him enter. So he says to the serpent, I want to go visit my student, Rav Kahana. Serpent doesn't move. I want to go visit my colleague. We're equals. Serpent doesn't budge. I want to visit my teacher, Rav Kahana. The snake slithers away. Rabbi Yochanan gets to the grave. He starts praying. Miracle of all miracles. He's able to resurrect Rav Kahana. He resurrects him, and they start having a conversation. It's unbelievable, I know. But these people were absolute giants. They could resurrect people, no problem. Split the sea, no problem. And he has a conversation with Rav Kahana. And Rav Kahana is like, come back with me to the yeshiva. I need more people like you. Rav Kahana's like, I don't think so. I had a bad experience round one. Unless you can promise me that you'll never cause me to die by getting upset at me, I'm not coming back. He says to him, well, I cannot promise that. He says the Babylonians, they're greater Torah scholars than us. And indeed, Rav Kahana ultimately ended up going back to Babylon. There's a nice epilogue to that story. Rav Kahana, after he died and came back, he was approached by some mockers, like, oh, well, when you were dead for that couple of hours, what did you see? So he says, I saw that you're going to die. Indeed, the guy died. It says, so Rav Kahana is like, oh my gosh, these people are all asking the same question. I don't want to kill all people of Israel. I'm going to head back to Babylon, which he did. Now, there's another interesting. But they had a various matter of Torah, interesting matter of Torah that came before him, the yeshiva, regarding the priming for impurity. Any item, any utensil, it has to be finished before it can become impure. So the question that the Gemara entertains, and whatnot, when are they finished? He says his answer, when you scrub them in the water. So they said to him, oh, you're the expert, because you used to be the thief, you used to use these, you're the expert. And Rish Lakish is absolutely dismayed. He's like, I left that world. What did I gain? I was a thief, and now they're still calling me a thief. How did I possibly improve my situation? So Rabbi Yochanan says, what? How did you improve your situation? I took you and I brought you under the canopy of the Shekhinah. So as a result of that, there was acrimony and disappointment, and both of them fell ill, and indeed both of them died as a result of their illness that they had because of this fight that they had with each other. But these episodes, I selected some out of hundreds upon hundreds of stories, and certainly thousands upon thousands of teachings from the Talmud. But this shows, I think, number one, their great prowess, in Torah matters, but even in matters of greatness associated with miracle doers. These people had Torah to such a degree that just like the Torah precedes the world, the Torah has mastery. The Torah is higher in the pecking order over nature. They too, because they incorporated Torah within them, they mastered nature. If Rabbi Yochanan was upset at you, you would die because he is higher than the rules of nature say you're alive. But Rabbi Yochanan says, I don't know why this guy is alive. You're dead. That's just the way it is. And the stories about all these people, that they had these, these are stories. These were giants that these episodes really happened to. There's even a modern day story. I'll say it very quickly. That happened in the 1970s. The Mishnah tells us that a person should always warm himself up with the fire of the Torah scholars, but be careful not to get too close, to not get singed, to not get burned by their coals. Why? Because their bite is the bite of a fox, their sting is the sting of a scorpion, and their hiss is the hiss of a snake. That's what the Mishnah says in Chapters of the Fathers. It means that be careful not to tick off the rabbis, the Torah scholars, because they can be very dangerous. I think that would explain a lot of these episodes. But there's a great story from the 1970s with Rabbi Avad Yosef, who died in 2013, someone who lived in modern times. Now, he was the chief rabbi of Israel at the time, and this is in the aftermath of the Yom Kippur War. Yom Kippur War, it was the worst war in Israel's history. They had sent thousands of soldiers died during the war, but also many hundreds certainly were missing in action. And the halacha is, unless you have a dead body, a corpse, the wife cannot remarry because who knows if the person is actually dead. And Rabbi Avad Yosef, he accepted upon himself the task of interviewing soldiers and finding all of the information that he possibly could to try to permit as many women to remarry. So there was a woman reporter, who concocted a whole story to try to embarrass the great rabbi. And she made up a story that her husband was in war and she got witnesses and he's missing. And she presents all the information to Rabbi Avadia and she says to him, Can I remarry? And he says to her, yes, based upon your evidence. She's so excited. She has the greatest scoop. She found the rabbis a fraud. She quickly goes out. She finds a public telephone. She calls the office of her newspaper. She's so excited to be able to have this story that's going to be the scandal of all scandals. It's going to totally destroy the reputation of the great rabbi. And she calls the office like, I can't believe I'm speaking to you. Do you know what happened? She's like, well, what are you talking about? I don't know what happened. Well, your husband died in a car accident. He's dead. Rabbi Vadi says, you're allowed to remarry, your husband's dead, and her husband dead. That's it. And that's a story that happened in modern times. Certainly the great rabbis of yesteryear were capable of that. If you try to play games with them, you try to say, oh, what did you see in the heavens? You don't really have a long lifespan awaiting you. Now, these scholars highlight the pages of the Talmud. They're prolific teachers. Rav in Babylon, he is mentioned more than 1,500 times in Babylonian Talmud. He is quoted by 167 of his students in the Talmud. 167 different teachers quoted him. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Rabbi Yehuda said the name of Rav. Rav Gidel said the name of Rav. All these rabbis who taught over the teaching of Rav Yochanan, his name is mentioned more than 1,700 times in Babylonian Talmud. He is the chief architect of the Jerusalem Talmud. He has 170 Amoraim that quoted him. These people established the Torah that's going to make up the Talmud. They lived tragic lives. Shmuel had, his sons died, his daughters were taken in captivity. Rabbi Yochanan had an exceedingly, inordinately tragic life himself. He had 10 sons that died in his lifetime. And the Talmud says that when he would go to try to comfort someone who's mourning, he would carry the tooth of his last son that died. And he said to him, I feel your pain. I too know what it's like to suffer tragedy. Of course, these are just small flavors of their character, but the monumental Torah contributions of these giants are absolutely amazing, beyond fathoming. These names appear on virtually every page of the Talmud, but they also set up multi-generations of Torah excellence, both in Israel and in Babylon, and indeed, they developed the infrastructure that's going to be so vital to the completion of the Talmud and indeed the perpetuation of the Jewish communities. And I thank you all. And if there's any questions, very quickly.
Rabbi, after tonight, I know you know more than us.
Okay, I'll
I do have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Mishnah, Talmud.
Yes.
Explain why. I kind of thought they were the same.
They're similar, they're just different aspects of the same thing. They're both oral Torah. One of them is laws, one is explication of laws.
One is laws.
And one is explication of laws.
So which one is
Mishnah's laws, Talmud is explication of that laws.
Okay.
Clarifying every detail.
Thank you.
What's the difference between the Torah in Israel versus the Torah in Babylon? Because you said that the scholars came, one